Here, the divorce papers. I'm taking all the inheritance for myself." Dean said with a big yawn as I was greeting our relatives, and chuckled lightly. "What are you joking about? In such a situation, how could you?" "It's no joke. You were Dad's favorite, so I married you reluctantly. There's no other choice but for me to take over Dad's company. Meaning, all the inheritance is mine. With Dad gone, you're no longer needed." Despite his father just having passed away, Dean was only thinking about the inheritance. Hearing Dean's words, I felt something I had been holding back suddenly snap. My father-in-law had once been a great help to me, and I had endured for his sake, but I can't take it anymore. "Fine, I'll grant you the divorce." I decided on revenge to protect the company left by my deceased father-in-law and regain the self-respect I lost through my marriage to Dean. This isn't over yet. My name is Brenda Lewis. I will turn 33 this year. I had to take over Cooper Manufacturing immediately after my father died in an accident at the age of 25, without time to grieve. Back then, the role of president felt overwhelming to me, who was just an ordinary employee, and my spirit nearly broke many times. During those times, my father-in-law, Dalton, supported me. Dalton was an old friend of my father's and rushed over as soon as he heard the news. Being a business owner himself, Dalton taught me the basics of management from scratch. He is a great benefactor to both me and my company. 3 years after becoming president, Dalton invited me to dinner and introduced me to his son, Dean. "Brenda, this is my son, Dean. I've put him in charge of managing one of our branches. We hope to increase cooperation with your company. Please look forward to working together." "Nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you from my father. I've been entrusted with the branch office, but I'm still inexperienced, so please guide me kindly." Dean, who spoke with a bright smile, seemed at first glance to be a very sincere young man. Knowing he was Dalton's son, I was convinced of his competence and was able to build a friendly relationship quickly. Dean, always with a smile, asked, "I heard from my father that you're managing a company at such a young age after your late father's passing. Your abilities are impressive given your youth. What industry does your business operate in?" To this, I revealed the name of our company. Our company is called Cooper Manufacturing, and we primarily handle automobile parts. I'm still an inexperienced president, but I'm striving every day to protect this company left by my father. Without the support of many, including Miss Lewis, I wouldn't have had the confidence to run this company on my own. Cooper Manufacturing, you say? That's a new name to me. I understand small factories are having a tough time in the current economic climate, but I support you. Dean then looked at me with what seemed like disdain, but quickly returned to his previous gentle smile. Although I felt a slight discomfort at that change, I quickly convinced myself I was overthinking it and continued the conversation while enjoying some drinks. Gradually, Dean began to ask me out for meals and dates more frequently, and half a year after we met, he proposed to me. "Brenda, let's start a relationship. I've always sought someone as strong and warm-hearted as you." Initially hesitant, I decided to date him due to his sincere attitude and my gratitude towards Dalton. After a year of dating, the two of us got married. During our engagement, Dean was continuously kind and treated me with great care. So when do you plan to quit your job? One morning, a month after our wedding, Dean casually threw that question at me while I was preparing breakfast. I stopped the knife I was holding. I haven't thought about quitting. Dean frowned in displeasure at my response and looked unhappy. Hey, we're married, right? Sure, it's just a branch, but I am the president. You working despite being married makes it seem like my income is insufficient, which isn't a good impression for other employees. But this company is what my father left behind. I won't leave it no matter what. Dean snorted disdainfully and continued with a condescending attitude. It's just a small-town factory. When compared to big corporations like ours, it's clear which is more important. I realized then that the discomfort I felt when we first met was because Dean looked down on the company my father had left as merely a small-town factory. Dean, that's not the right way to speak. My company has important business partners and staff. I can't just quit. Business partners and staff? That's nothing significant. Isn't it obvious that your company doesn't even compare to one of our branches? I was at a loss for words at his remark. Dean clearly didn't understand the responsibility of running a company, regardless of its size. I took a deep breath and tried to address the situation calmly. Dean, the value of a company isn't just in its size. Even if it's small, it has its significance. My company, too. I get it. It's important to you. But face reality. It's unimaginable that a company run by someone as inexperienced as you could survive. After throwing those words at me, Dean glanced at me with contempt. His attitude was so shocking that it went beyond anger. My father was a warm-hearted president who cherished his employees. I always admired my father for that. But Dean insulted my father. Struggling to contain my trembling anger, I barely managed to respond. Dean, our companies may differ in size, but our employees and partners are important too. It's wrong to belittle them like that, and please stop looking down on my company as just a small-town factory. So what? It's just a local business, right? Our company handles various products, including automobiles and appliances. The difference in scale is clear. This is why it's troublesome with beginners. Really, it's disheartening. I'll have breakfast outside. Sighing, Dean left for work without waiting for a reply. Left alone. I could only stand there. And then, the tears I had been holding back began to overflow. Wiping my tears, I cleaned up the breakfast dishes with a feeling of frustration. Frustration, sadness, and my disappointment and revulsion towards Dean muddled my emotions. That evening, when I returned home exhausted, unexpectedly, Dean was already back. As I opened the front door, the aroma of delicious cooking filled the house. "I'm home," I said quietly. In response to my words, Dean peeked out from the kitchen. "Welcome back, Brenda." His voice was warmer than it had been in the morning. As I stood there puzzled, Dean began to speak. "I'm sorry about this morning. I was stressed from work and took it out on you. I shouldn't have directed it at you," he apologized to me. The sight of him apologizing gradually dissolved the anger in my heart. As a gesture of reconciliation, I tried to prepare dinner. I'm not confident about the taste, though, Dean said with a bashful smile. His words made me smile involuntarily. Thank you, I really appreciate it, I expressed my gratitude. We sat down at the table together and began eating the meal Dean had prepared. While the food wasn't gourmet, his effort made it strangely delicious. It's good. Thank you, Dean, I murmured softly. Dean smiled satisfactorily at that. With this, our argument seemed to have ended, but afterwards, there was a noticeable change in Dean's behavior. For a time, he regained his former kindness, but gradually he became colder towards me and his disparaging remarks about my company increased. A year into our marriage, his behavior resembled that of a tyrannical ruler. When I came home late from work, he greeted me sarcastically while lying on the sofa. Finally home, huh, Madam President? What time do you think it is? I'm sorry, I was held up by an unexpected meeting. I'll prepare dinner right away. I said this almost apologetically and hurried to the kitchen. Watching me, Dean scoffed derisively. A meeting? Huh? Were you really working overtime? Is the president of a small-town factory that busy? I didn't respond to his words and silently started cooking. The relationship between us continued to deteriorate. Dean, disliking mere formal apologies, appeared before me without hiding his anger, saying coldly, "Brenda, do you understand how you're managing to live like this? You're acting like you're just the president of some small-town factory." I internally resisted, but dealing with his company was crucial for mine. I gave up on arguing, but it wasn't that I felt nothing. Struggling to contain my anger, I responded with a trembling voice. I live thanks to your support. I appreciate it. This response irritated Dean, and he became even more aggressive. If you're thankful, show it. Or apologize from the bottom of your heart, and I'll forgive you. I bit my lip hard to suppress my anger. What's the matter? Can't you do it? If you can't, I don't mind terminating our contract with your company. I can crush your company any time. If there's no apology, I'll suspend our transactions. As he said this with a sneer, I felt disgusted but decided to protect my company. Though I tried to apologize, my pride wouldn't allow it, and I hesitated. What are you doing? Hurry up. Pushed by his urging, I finally pleaded. Please continue doing business with us. I beg you. Seeing me beg so desperately, Dean laughed smugly. Hack, pathetic. To think such a person is a president. His attitude and his contemptuous words made me feel frustrated, but I had no choice but to yield to his threat to stop the transactions. I quietly endured the situation. 3 years into our marriage, Dean's arrogant behavior intensified, and his criticism towards me and my company worsened. Every time I came home, I was almost certainly met with his harsh words. Initially, I protested, but once I realized arguing was pointless, I just let it slide. Really, how late can you be? How long do you plan to keep me waiting? He would greet me angrily, and then continue to complain at length about me and my company. You say you've been working late recently, but is your company about to go under? Don't worry, if it fails, I'll hire you after it's ruined. I'll spread the rumor that an incompetent woman destroyed her company. Sneering as he said this, I felt resentment towards him but knew arguing was futile, so I remained silent. Perhaps dissatisfied with my attitude, Dean's anger only grew, and he kept complaining to me. You really lack the awareness of being a president. A president is supposed to be the leader of the company, yet you can't do anything beyond your job and taking care of me. If it weren't for me, you couldn't do anything at all, so try harder to please me. With that final accusation, he cheerfully headed to the bedroom. Feeling both anger and emptiness from Dean's attitude, I quietly cleaned up. I was utterly exhausted by such daily routines, and living with Dean had become a torment. Still, I dreamed of the day I could turn the tables on him, and for now I could only endure. That day became unforgettable. I received a call that Dalton, my father-in-law, had fallen ill. When I rushed to the hospital, I found out he was unconscious and in critical condition. As I stepped into the hospital room, Dean stood there looking lost. I approached slowly and gently took Dalton's hand. "Father-in-law," I called out quietly. It seemed like his hand moved slightly, but it might have been my imagination. The next morning, Dalton quietly passed away. On the day of the funeral, I wore black mourning clothes and quietly entered the venue where people were gathering. The number of attendees conveyed how much Dalton was loved. In the solemn atmosphere, I politely greeted each mourner and looked for Dean. The moment I spotted him, an unbelievable scene unfolded before me. Dean, as the chief mourner, wore an inappropriate, bored expression and occasionally yawned largely, seemingly unaware of the cold stares from the visitors. "Dean," I called out to him quietly. He turned towards me and his expression changed momentarily, but soon he seemed to lose interest and return to his previous demeanor. I took a deep breath and vowed to remain calm. "Are you properly greeting the people who've come for the funeral?" Dean scoffed disdainfully, pulled out his smartphone, and said coldly, "It's too much hassle, handle it yourself." I watched in astonishment as he opened a game app. "Dean, your father's funeral is happening right now," I said with a trembling voice, trying to draw his attention, but he continued to ignore me, absorbed in his smartphone. Occasionally, the sound of his game cut through the surrounding silence, and I could feel the icy stares from the attendees. Feeling apologetic to those around us, I tried to gently stop him from using his smartphone. "Please, just for today, refrain from it," I pleaded, but Dean shook off my hand without hiding his irritation. "Stop bothering me. Let me do what I want at the funeral. It would be better if this ended sooner." He continued with his insensitive remarks. His words weighed heavily on my heart, and I questioned if this was the man I once loved. There was no trace of respect for Dalton. Eventually, the funeral ended somehow, and as the family gathering for the meal began, Dean blurted out boredly, "Finally, it's over. Here are the divorce papers. I'm taking all the inheritance for myself," he said half-jokingly as he laughed smugly. In his hand, he already held a divorce paper he had filled out. I stared at Dean, dumbfounded. "What are you joking about? In such a situation, how could you?" "It's no joke. You were Dad's favorite, so I married you reluctantly. There's no choice but for me to take over Dad's company, meaning all the inheritance is mine. With Dad gone, you're no longer needed." Dean seemed only interested in the inheritance, even just after his father had passed away. "Dean, let's put off this talk. There's no need to discuss this right now." "No, we settle this here. If you don't agree to the divorce, I'll terminate all contracts with your company." His statement caused an uproar among the relatives. "Are you really going to do that?" "Yes, I'm serious. Ending the contracts with your small factory won't affect my company." Dean's words pushed me to my limit. I had been grateful to and loved my father-in-law, and so I endured everything because of him, but I could no longer bear it. "Fine, I'll grant you the divorce." As I made the offer, Dean smiled broadly, handed me the divorce papers, and said, "Make sure to submit these soon. By the way, you can stay in the house until next week." And then he left the scene. Trembling with anger, I took only the essentials and immediately checked into a nearby hotel. Since I don't have children, I can be flexible. This helps me respond quickly to situations. The next morning, I went to the courthouse at its opening time to submit the divorce papers, and then immediately contacted my secretary to arrange an emergency board meeting in 1 hour. Upon arriving at the company, the board members were already waiting in the conference room. As I entered, they all stood up in respect. Once I took my seat, they sat down as well. I apologize for the urgency, but there is an important decision that needs to be shared. I began, and someone audibly swallowed in nervousness. Some may already be aware of yesterday's events. I continued calmly. Effective today, we will cease all dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering. Please review the contracts to ensure there are no penalties for breach. Voices of surprise filled the meeting room. Lewis Precision Engineering had been a valuable partner to our enterprise, but it was also led by Dean. After all discussions were concluded and the board members had left the room, I walked over to the window and took a deep breath. Looking out, I firmed up my new decision. Let's take action. I called my secretary and issued the necessary instructions. Prepare a notice ending our dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering and inform my ex-husband as well. Set up a meeting at 3 p.m. After my secretary nodded and left, I looked out the window again and murmured, "Are you ready? This is just the beginning." Smiling, I stood in front of the building of Lewis Precision Engineering at 2:45 p.m., adjusting my suit and taking a deep breath. Upon giving my name at reception, I received a polite response. "Miss Cooper, you have a 3 p.m. appointment. Please wait a moment." After a call through the internal line, a young woman quickly came to greet me. Her demeanor made it clear that she was my husband's secretary. We followed her and took the elevator to the top floor of the building. My heart rate increased slightly, but I made an effort to maintain a calm expression. After arriving, the secretary led the way and stopped in front of a large door, giving a light knock. When the door opened, there was Dean, seated in a large chair within the spacious office. "What do you want? Is the divorce finalized? Or did you come to ask for money? A woman running a small-town factory must have too much free time on her hands." His voice was dripping with his usual arrogance. Since we had no financial arrangements when we parted, he seemed to misunderstand that I had come to demand something. I quietly took a seat and, after calming myself, continued speaking. "It's been a while, President Lewis. I am here to discuss business matters." What's with the cold attitude? He could hardly hide his irritation. Smiling slightly, I slowly took a document out of my bag and said, "I have come to deliver this. As of today, we will be terminating our business dealings with your company." As I spoke calmly, Dean's face changed color, and he froze momentarily. However, his laughter soon filled the room. "You're joking, right? Your company is cutting off business with us? It's just a small-town factory, isn't it?" Dean still seemed unable to grasp the reality. In fact, Lewis Precision Engineering's business with Cooper Manufacturing accounts for 40% of your revenue. This will significantly impact your company. He looked back at me in astonishment. "You're lying. I thought Cooper Manufacturing was just a small-town factory." "You didn't know at all, did you? Cooper Manufacturing actually employs 9,000 people and has an annual revenue of $1 billion. That's absurd." Just as he was about to say something, his secretary discreetly conveyed something to him. At that moment, Dean's complexion changed drastically and turned pale. As I thought about the significant impact our business termination would have on his company, a smile couldn't help but spill across my face. But I never heard such a thing from you. You just assumed when you heard the company name. I simply followed through on what you said. Ending business with Cooper Manufacturing won't affect my company was what you said, right? I repeated his words calmly, highlighting how crucial they had been for the survival of his company. This break could mean the end of his company. He seemed to realize this as his face grew even paler. "Wait a minute. I just misunderstood Cooper Manufacturing as a mere small-town factory. Besides, if you're making so much, why do you always wear such simple clothes? You're joking, right, Brenda?" Dean, previously full of confidence, now pleaded weakly. "You really don't understand anything. I'm just following my father's teachings." I sighed deeply and looked at him intently. My father despised flaunting wealth and understood its risks well. That's why I live modestly, quite the opposite of you, who squanders money. As I smiled gently, Dean's face turned red with anger and embarrassment, and he fell silent. Just because we're divorced doesn't mean I want to end the dealings. Doing business with Lewis Precision Engineering has indeed been profitable for us. However, recent issues with quality and delays in delivery. I paused mid-sentence and looked directly at Dean. "And the main reason is your moral failings. You shirked your responsibilities as the chief mourner at your father's funeral and pushed a divorce paper at me while many relatives watched. You declared, "All the inheritance is mine." I was drunk. I was sad about my father's death and had some drinks before the funeral. It wasn't intentional. For 3 years since our marriage, you have looked down on me. You never understood my profession, only criticized and insulted me. And yesterday you showed your true colors. If that wasn't your true self, then what is? Dean remained silent, at a loss for words. Dealing with someone who lacks such ethical standards poses a risk to Cooper Manufacturing. That's why we are terminating our dealings. Brenda, please reconsider. Our company will go under. As Dean pleaded in a feeble voice, I responded with a cold smile. Your company will be fine, right? I remember you often said, I can buy it out anytime if I really wanted to. Dean's complexion turned ghostly pale. Dean likely never imagined his own words would come back to haunt him like this. You bastard. As he said this, Dean stood up and swung his arm towards me in anger. At that moment, his movement froze mid-air. Do you really intend to overpower me? Go ahead, try it. If you commit violence here, the reputation of Lewis Precision Engineering will only worsen. Moreover, attacking the female president of Cooper Manufacturing would be even more disgraceful. My calm response caused Dean's hand to tremble. Damn it! While filled with rage, he slowly lowered his hand. This is goodbye. Farewell. With that, I left the room. I could hear Dean's shouts behind me, but they seemed distant now. Half a year had passed since my company ended our business dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering. During that time, the decline of Lewis Precision Engineering was significant. Initially, Dean tried to revive the business. He looked for new business partners and tried to motivate his employees, but once the termination of our dealings became public, his company's credibility rapidly declined. 2 months later, major clients began to cancel their contracts one after another, and Dean started offering excessive trading conditions, which further damaged his company's reputation. 4 months in, Lewis Precision Engineering faced financial difficulties, payments to employees were delayed, and staff began resigning or moving to other companies. The bankruptcy of Lewis Precision Engineering seemed inevitable. That day, I received a phone call. Hello, Brenda. The voice was hoarse and difficult to hear, but I immediately recognized it as Dean. What is it? I asked coolly. Please, I need to talk to you in person. Gone was his previous arrogance, replaced only by a tone of desperation. All right, let's meet tomorrow at 3 p.m. at Cooper Manufacturing. After hanging up, I sighed heavily. I had decided to end it all. The next day, Dean arrived 10 minutes early for our appointment. He was a shadow of his former self, wearing a worn-out suit, unshaven, with clearly bloodshot eyes from lack of sleep. Thank you for waiting, I said as I entered the reception room, and Dean quickly stood up. Brenda, thank you. I'm really glad to see you. His voice was trembling. Please, I'm begging you to resume business with Lewis Precision Engineering. Why? I asked in a cold voice. Dean seemed taken aback for a moment, but then responded with a look of desperation. My company is on the brink of collapse. I can't even pay my employees, and the pressure from creditors is increasing day by day. That is the result of your management decisions. My merciless reply changed his complexion. Suddenly, he dropped to his knees and bowed deeply. Please, just give me one more chance. His figure was pitiful and tragic. The once arrogant man was now prostrating himself on the ground, begging for forgiveness. Dean, I called, and he briefly lifted his face, showing a glimpse of hope, but I continued, I'm sorry, but there is no second chance. My cold words froze him. I could see his eyes shift from hope to despair. But Brenda Dean tried to continue with a trembling voice, but I cut him off. Enough. You belittled me for 3 years. Even on the day of your father's funeral, you trampled on my feelings. There is no room for sympathy for someone like you. Dean once again lowered his forehead to the floor, pleading as if seeking pity. I have already apologized for that. Please. This isn't for the sake of the company, not for me, but genuinely for the employees. My resolve was firm, knowing that such apologies, while necessary, did not erase the consequences of his actions or the underlying attitudes that led to them. This was about more than just business, it was about respect and consequences. For the employees, if you had truly put them first, it wouldn't have come to this. This is the result of prioritizing your own protection. Dean's shoulders trembled, and he continued in a tearful voice. Please, don't abandon me. In response to Dean's plea, I calmly noted the time. It's time now. President Lewis, please leave for today. At that, the secretary entered the room. She took Dean by the hand and gently wiped his tear-streaked face as she led him out. Around noon, I went down to the lobby, where Dean was still standing. He looked at me, seemingly about to say something, but his opportunity was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a third party. President, may I have a moment of your time? The person asked quietly. Hearing that voice, Dean dropped to his knees in shock. What's happening? Morgan, why are you here? The employee called Morgan glanced at Dean briefly, but then returned his focus to me. President, may I have a little of your time? No problem. Let's discuss this in the conference room. I answered, moving forward before Dean could say anything. In that instant, Dean tried to grab my arm in a panic. Wait a minute. Brenda. What is this about? Why is my subordinate here? However, before he could touch me, security swiftly intervened. Unbelievable. Morgan, you are a traitor. Dean exclaimed. You are the one who betrayed me, Lewis. It's clear you pursued only your own interests, without any regard for your employees. Morgan replied calmly. At this, Dean's face went completely pale, losing all color. Morgan, this way, I urged him, and we left the area. As we departed, Dean's screams echoed behind us, but I did not look back. Despite the cessation of dealings with Lewis Precision Engineering, Cooper Manufacturing continued to grow, absorbing new talent and achieving success in new ventures. The workforce exceeded 12,000 employees, significantly expanding its market share and raising expectations as a pillar of the U.S. economy. Cooper Manufacturing's growth was recognized, and I received the CEO of the Year award. As a female leader, my status solidified, and I was widely covered in the media. 5 years later, in the fall, I attended the opening ceremony of Cooper Manufacturing's new headquarters. From the top floor of this building, I looked out over the expansive view of New York, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. In my speech at the ceremony, I concluded, "Adversity is the nourishment that strengthens us. We have the strength to overcome any difficulty. Cooper Manufacturing will continue to move forward." Thunderous applause filled the venue, resonating deeply within me. Dean's life had changed dramatically, to the astonishment of those around him. Driven by financial greed, he personally guaranteed corporate bonds and misappropriated funds. Subsequently, his amateur investment strategies failed, and through fraud, he incurred even more substantial debts, ultimately leading to his company's collapse. It's said that his total debt exceeded $50 million. Even after stepping down as president, he was constantly pursued by creditors, living a life overshadowed by daily repayments. He filed for bankruptcy, hoping for debt forgiveness, but his extravagance backfired, and he was forced to continue repayments. His payments were often delayed, and the debt grew even larger due to interest. Whether he can repay all his debts during his lifetime is unpredictable. One day, I accidentally saw him working as a part-time employee at a local supermarket. He looked much older than when I last saw him, with thinning hair and a vacant stare, a stark contrast to the man he once was. Next to a magazine headline reading Cooper Manufacturing President, among the top 10 in annual income, he silently stocked shelves. Seeing him, I felt a mix of emotions. The man who once looked down on me was now in such a predicament. I looked away and quietly left the scene. My private life began with meeting a very attractive man 3 years ago. This meeting culminated in our marriage at the end of last year. He is supportive of my career path, strongly backing my professional choices. We have built a beautiful relationship where we support each other and grow together. Currently, we are enjoying the joy of expecting a new life. Next spring, I am due to embrace a new role as a mother, which will be a significant turning point for me. Although my concerns about maintaining a balance between work and home life are not entirely resolved, I am confident that with the support of family, friends, and colleagues, I will be able to overcome these challenges. I am very much looking forward to seeing how much I have grown by this time next year. I am committed to working hard towards the ideals I aspire to and forging a fulfilling future for myself. Against the grand backdrop of New York, I quietly smile. My expression is brimming with a sense of accomplishment and hope. I close my eyes gently and speak to my late father in my heart. Dad, the vision you once had for the company, I have made it a reality.